The question is, explain the benefit of partitioning in Hive with an example. So basically, why do we use partitioning in Hive? What exactly is partitioning in Hive? So basically, partitioning, kind of speeds up the queries uh, when used properly. So let me explain with an example how partitioning can be beneficial in Hive. So let's say you have this input data where you have name of a customer, ID of a customer, age of a customer, and the country to which it belongs, right? So let's say this is our sample data where we have some customers from US, some customers from India, some customers from UK, and we have their name, ID, and their age. And let's say our Hive query is like, let me actually write it in the form of Hive query. So our problem statement is find average age of customers in US. So my Hive query is going to be select average of age from whatever table name it is, let's say subscribers, where country is equal to US, right? So that is going to be my Hive query. So when you are not using partitioning, what happens is your input data is actually stored in one file or multiple files in the same directory. So directory, there is a directory corresponding to every table, and in that directory you will have the files for the data, right? And when you run this query, Hive actually converts this query into a MapReduce job on the backend, and that MapReduce job will basically take this data as input, or you can say this file as input, and then runs the logic to find whatever you have asked the system to find. So in this case, the average age of subscribers where the country is US. So what's going to happen is your map function internally is going to take one record as input from this data, and then it will check whether the country is equal to US or not. And if the country is US, then it will use the age to finally calculate the average age. But what's going to happen is every record in this file is gonna go to your map function, and then map function will discard all the records where country is not US, right? So you are reading all your input data from the disk. Whereas if you had used partitioning, you can choose on which columns you want to partition your data. So in this case, we know that number of countries are going to be limited, right? So it's not something which keeps on growing. So let's say you have 200, 300 countries. So that's the maximum cardinality of this dimension in your data. So you can partition your table on the country column, right? And in that case, your data is going to be stored in separate directories for separate countries. So all the data where country is equal to US will be stored in a directory like this, where subscribers is your table name, and then this is your partitioning column. So you'll have countries equal to US as the directory name, and within that directory you will have a file which will contain records only of US. This record, and this record. Okay, and after that, when you run any query like this, it will take as input only data present in this particular directory, and it doesn't need to actually read this data. So in that way, you have increased the performance of your Hive query, right? But the it has to be used carefully. You cannot partition your Hive table on a column which can be very high cardinality column. So for example, if you partition your column, if you partition your data based on name column, there can be millions of names, right? So what's going to happen is every directory is going to contain very little data. So you're going to run into a problem where you'll have millions of files, right? And then also your queries will not be like something like where you're putting a condition on the name, right? So it depends on what kind of queries you are finally going to run. If most of your queries are going to have a condition on country, then it makes sense to partition your data on country, right? Because most of your queries are not going to be conditional on name. It doesn't make any sense to partition your data on name. If you want to actually partition your data based on a high cardinality column, there is another concept in Hive which is called bucketing. Bucketing is basically it takes multiple values for a column and puts them together into one directory. Okay, so that's a different question. But for partitioning, if most of your queries are based on one column, then you can partition your Hive table on that particular column. Thank you.